The sheer scale of consumer in the African continent is, 1.5 billion people. If you just engage with the top 1%, it's incredibly significant. You could have 15 million people consuming one item of your portfolio. That is, it's meaningful. So I think, betting on the fact that there is scale is really important in terms of top line growth.
Hi, Aimee. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Amelia. Thanks for having me.
You've built your career across African markets within the luxury industry and outside, actually. Could we start with you just sharing a little about your journey and what brought you here?
So I studied at the University of Cape Town and I studied business science and did an honours in marketing. And then I had a great opportunity to go to SAB Miller, which is now AB InBev in Johannesburg, on a graduate program. And I worked there on beer brands with the opportunity to move into consumer insights for a period of time and in the brand team. And then I had the opportunity to move back to Cape Town to a smaller company, but it was the distributor of Moët Hennessy portfolio in South Africa. So it was a great opportunity for me to get a taste of luxury. And that's actually where I fell in love with luxury and later moved to Moët Hennessy in South Africa as part of the regional team and have subsequently moved from regional marketing manager to head of consumer engagement. And then I had a short-term assignment and I did a stint in Belgium as the marketing director for Belgium and Luxembourg. And then I returned as the regional marketing director for Middle East and Africa.
So I feel like it's been, decades that Africa probably has been perhaps overlooked or underestimated, for the luxury market. But today, being a bit of an insights, report geek, it's in all of the wealth reports and it's showing a very different story, which is why I was so excited to have you on the show. So Africa's been projected to be one of the fastest growing regions for high net wealth individuals over the next decade. And I even prepared a couple of stats just to sort of bring up. We've got the Knight Frank report saying that the ultra high net wealth individuals in Africa, so that's net worth over $10 million US, and that was a 5-year projection. You've got the Henley and Partner Africa Wealth Report, which is saying 65% of Africa's total millionaire population is set to rise over the next decade as well. So Aimee, I'm dying to ask you, from where you sit, what does this growth actually look like on the ground beyond the headlines?
Having spent some time in Europe, one of the things that really struck me is that there's so many firsts that can still happen in Africa. There's just so much opportunity to create. And what I've seen is a huge amount of entrepreneurship. There are just so many opportunities that we're seeing across markets, and consumers are really ambitious. People are really ambitious. We often talk about consumers, but they're people. And in Africa, there's this huge desire to create, to make their mark. And we often talk about it as the sense of hustle culture, which is not often as prevalent in other markets around the world, where everything is quite established, where everything works, where things have been done for decades. And I think that is really fueling the sense of opportunity, because more and more people are creating wonderful things and having very quick rises to wealth, where perhaps that is less of the case in other markets. So that is really exploding the consumer opportunity that we have across many markets in Middle East and Africa.
And where are you seeing the most, let's say, meaningful shifts in wealth, consumption, or even aspiration?
I think, it really differs. We're seeing a huge amount of growth in East Africa. The infrastructure in East Africa is really rising significantly. So we're seeing a lot of growth there. Middle East, of course, unfortunately, in the current times, it's incredibly challenging. But prior to what's going on geopolitically, it was incredibly robust. Loads of tourism. It was really a hot destination. I've never seen so many hotels, flourish so quickly. And Dubai is a city, but it actually has more global iconic hotels than London and New York, in one small geographic area, if I could say. One expects New York and London to have more, but actually combined, Dubai has more of the global international hotel brands in one geography. We're seeing it across Africa. Morocco is a really hot tourist destination. Even the Indian Ocean Islands, Maldives, Seychelles, Mauritius, There's really a lot of curiosity in Africa. And I think it stems also from a shift in global trends where people are wanting to slow down, to get close to nature. And Africa is really a hot destination from that regard because there's really so much that it offers.
If someone was in, let's say, a luxury, a global luxury team looking at Africa for the first time, what would be the one thing that you feel they should be prioritizing in terms of what they understand about the market before they start planning?
I think it's absolutely critical to understand your consumer, Amelia. And I think something that often goes wrong is people assume that Africa is a country, but there are 54 countries in Africa, and every country is very unique, just like Europe. You never talk about the European consumer. It's very different whether you're in Germany or France or Italy. The consumer dynamics are vastly different because of a multitude of things. So I think that for me is critical. In Nigeria, it's much more bold. Consumers want to be seen and heard and celebrated. It's vibrant, it's dynamic. There's lots happening. Ghana is sort of slightly more demure, I would say. It's slightly more understated, a strong sense of understanding your history and your roots. And that's something that really connects Ghanaians. And, in DRC, there's the spirit of showmanship. We often talk about people wanting to bring their identity to life, through music, through movement, through fashion flair. So I think it's really important to understand, the nuances market by market and be very specific on the target consumer you're wanting to reach, and then choose the markets that are most fitting to your brand and to your business ambition.
That's an excellent seg actually onto my next question, because you and I have chuckled over this quite a lot, and it's been a frustration, or I think probably anybody working on the African continent, that there are 54 countries and there are distinct cultures. But when we look at luxury luxury brand management, we talk consistently about, consistency. How do you take a global luxury strategy and then make it work across the African markets without fragmenting the brand?
It's a great topic, Amelia, and I'm actually really passionate about it because I truly believe to be a successful marketer in Africa, you have to know your brand DNA intricately. You have to be so comfortable with what your global maison is trying to communicate in order for you to then find the way to consistently convey that in your market, but in a relevant way. So I think the number one thing I would say is truly understand the maison that you represent and that you serve in the African markets that you operate. And then I think it's critical to make sure that how you convey those messages of that maison is locally relevant and locally nuanced, because, what you might want to convey in a market about a brand might not be, necessarily relevant in one market. But just if you articulate it a little differently, you can find the sense of meaning. And I'll give you an example. The story of Veuve Clicquot, Madame Clicquot, and her entrepreneurial ambition and how she took the house, across markets. And she was incredibly audacious. She was incredibly bold. She was incredibly passionate. And those are all qualities that truly resonate with an African consumer. So when we champion the Veuve Clicquot Bold Woman Awards, we are very consistent to the same way that it's done across the globe, in Germany and the UK. However, the insights we bring to the fore and the reason for us activating that program in Africa is nuanced, depending on what will be relevant to the consumer. So our global story is consistent. How we show up is consistent, having a very clear visual identity, making sure that, market to market, it looks consistent. For me, that's critical. But then unpacking it is where it becomes locally nuanced. Even the award ceremony itself will have a different entertainment to what we have in Germany and the UK. But actually, it's still true to the global DNA, but it's locally relevant to the audience in which we're engaging. For example, in South Africa, one of the insights we got from the Veuve Clicquot Barometer study, which we did, was that actually female entrepreneurs are needing three things. They're needing more visibility. They have the hustle, they have the passion, they have the drive, but they just need to be connected. So they need more connection, and they need to see people that they can look up to be inspired. And so those were really three great insights that allowed us to build the platform in South Africa in a way that was going to be locally relevant to the audience that we wanted to engage. So the strategy is still consistent, the storytelling is still consistent, but the insights allow you to nuance it to your specific market. So we made sure that in our program for the Bold Woman Awards, we have people that our audience can look up to, that our consumers can aspire to be. We foster connection so that they have people that they can reach out to and they feel less alone in their entrepreneurial journey. And then we make sure we give them visibility at scale, on global scale. And that's what's super meaningful to the audience that participates in the Bold Woman Awards or the people that apply. And so that for me is an example of being globally consistent. We're not changing what we're saying. We're just nuancing it market by market. And in Dubai, when we activate bold conversations, it's different too to how we do it in South Africa, because there's different needs in that market, understandably. So we tailor our approach depending on the consumer we're talking to. So I thought that was, maybe just an example to try and illustrate the fact that you can be consistent, but locally nuanced.
And that's a really good point, because you talked about, understanding the local consumer. And, to be fair, it applies to a lot of global brands at the moment. So if we had to put a practical lens on what you've just said, if you're a brand or marketing manager, let's say preparing market entry, what would you say are perhaps the first sort of 2 or 3 things that they should actually research and validate on the ground?
Firstly, you shouldn't assume everything is the same as what you might know from a market you've been a part of before. So you have to have a sense of humility and a sense of curiosity to truly understand the market that you are going to now be participating in. I think the first thing is to really consider your marketing mix. So what is going to be the key elements that you're going to really leverage to make sure that you're distinct, that you're consistent, but that you're also highly relevant and resonant with the consumer that you want to reach after, of course, you've defined who that consumer is. So for example, it's often an example I share with our global brand teams, which is out-of-home execution would be very different in Europe to in Africa. So in Europe, having a beautiful advert on a bus shelter is pretty standard, is something that they would do, and that would really resonate with the consumer they're targeting. But in Africa, many of our consumers are driving, and therefore that would be a lot of wasted media. So being familiar with who your consumer is and how they consume media is super important and very nuanced market by market. I think ensuring your pricing is right is very important as well. So of course you have to respect global indexing, but understanding the competitive landscape and the purchasing power of the consumers in your markets is key. And then I think being very specific around your investment. Of course, your investment is finite. And I think making sure you're choosing impact is critical. We can't do everything, and I think being very specific around leveraging your A&P budget, but also your human resources, your team structure, to make sure whatever you're doing, you do very well with a 360 approach and a lot of impact.
So we know that luxury probably doesn't mean the same thing everywhere. And we've already talked about, there's 54 countries in Africa. When we think about luxury and what it signals, the status it signals in Paris is not going to carry the same weight in Lagos or Nairobi, as you well know. In your experience, Aimee, what does luxury mean in African markets? And when you answer, if you could sort of think about, both emotionally, socially, and culturally. I know culture is a big one there.
Luxury in Africa is much more expressive. It's very communal. It's something that's shared, so there is a sense of really showing up for one another. So socially, people really celebrate each other and celebrate big milestones. Weddings are a big moment in Africa. It's 200 people plus at a wedding celebration as an example. But even on a smaller scale, when people are awarded, or recognized by global brands, people really clap back. There's this sense of collective pride when a global brand nods to local talent, and I think there's this sense of collective, which is very prominent, and that dates back historically to many, many things. But I think there's this sense of shared success as well. When I rise with you. And when I achieve something great, I want to share that with you, my community, the people I care for, the people that have raised me, that have been part of my journey. And I think that is something quite different. There's this sense of showing up for one another that is very, very, very prominent. I think the other thing is that there's this sense of shared indulgence as well. You know, it's not only about personal indulgence. It's about sharing something that I'm getting to experience. I want to share it with others. And that gives a lot more joy than, you know, luxury on its own. I think it's quite wonderful when you see people enjoying our products. You know, there's this great sense of sharing and a willingness to not only share your success, but to share your knowledge and to share what you're passionate about. And I think that's also very important in luxury in Africa, is this sense of appreciation for the fact that not everything is known. So we need to make sure that with luxury brands, we share our savoir-faire, we share our knowledge, we share our craftsmanship, because consumers are really interested and they want to discover.
And what assumptions about luxury consumers do you believe brands need to unlearn when working in Africa?
I think the big thing is to not assume everything is as you know. And, you know, I sort of touched on that earlier, is to be really curious. There are not a lot of luxury brands in Africa. Louis Vuitton, for example, is only in South Africa. So it's not like New York or London, where on every street corner, you know, there's a beautiful boutique from ground to the sky. So many consumers actually travel to South Africa, Ghanaians, Nigerians, to shop at Louis Vuitton in South Africa. So I think a big thing is to not assume that luxury is very known, because we don't have many luxury brands. So yeah, making sure that you don't have an assumption that everything's the same, and making sure that you don't feel shy to educate consumers about what you're about, because it's not all known. So there's a lot of opportunity to tell your story, to tell your craftsmanship, to really welcome consumers into your brand and into your maison. And don't assume everything's been seen or done.
Is it fair to say that the luxury consumers don't all behave the same as perhaps what Europe might be expecting? You know, is there something about understanding that luxury consumer that is really different in Africa?
The main difference goes back again to how luxury is enjoyed. It's not enjoyed on your own, you know. And if I give you an example, we recently hosted a beautiful photographic exhibition in South Africa, and we had over 4,000 people come through the doors. And it was a super unique moment for consumers, because it doesn't, you know, there isn't many of these photographic exhibitions coming from luxury brands. But again, people came as a collective. They didn't come on their own. They didn't come one by one to view the exhibition, which is very standard in Europe. That's, you know, it's a pastime, it's a hobby for people to go on a Sunday to a beautiful exhibition. That's not the case. This was a moment, you know, and people came to the exhibition, they had lunch in the cafe afterwards, they shopped in the boutique. It was really a social moment, and it became the activity of the weekend. And I think that's, again, it's something nuanced that one needs to understand. And then also making sure that when you're hosting guests, you're hosting them in a collective, you know, not inviting someone on their own, because people want to come with somebody, you know, they don't want to come on their own because they want to share that moment, share that experience, share that event. Again, you know, I just think of another example when with Moët and Chandon, we really want to celebrate the end of year festive season, and around the globe, everybody did that in different ways with intimate dinners and different. And in South Africa, we had a beautiful tree lighting ceremony where we created a tree that was 12 meters tall, but we invited 2,000 people it was open to everybody to come and stand in the plaza and to witness this beautiful tree lighting ceremony where they could all collectively celebrate the festive season with this sense of togetherness, but real togetherness, you know, at scale, which is super unique for African consumers, because we don't have a lot of plazas, unlike Europe, you know, where it's very common to stand outside and witness a beautiful large Christmas tree. That's not the case here. So this was quite nuanced, but so magical, because you had this collective of people all together really enjoying a moment, which ordinarily is hard to come by in African markets, the sense of just being outside in an open space, because we don't have that type of landscape that we do in other parts of the world.
Would you say you're seeing more of that? It sounds almost experiential, and I'm hearing what you're saying in terms of the cultural aspect. They like to socialise, which is amazing. It sounds so fun. I want to come over there. Do you see a difference in the affluent side? You know, we're talking about high net wealth individuals in Africa on this episode. Do you see a difference there?
No, in terms of, you know, what I just described is very much what high net worth individuals are enjoying. You know, they're really enjoying connection, coming together, meeting one another. I mean, just last night, actually, we hosted Benoit Goes, our cellar master from Moët and Chandon. And it was just incredible for me personally, just to see how interested everybody was in the craftsmanship and his savoir-faire and his passion. They all said to me, gosh, he's just so inspiring, and the time he takes, and so that is very consistent with the rest of the world, So African consumers are not different in that regard. There's a huge appreciation, and I think they've just been less exposed to this type of storytelling because there are less luxury brands active in Africa at the moment.
What about the Middle East? Like, how would you describe that luxury consumer there?
It's really interesting, as you say, we can't assume markets in Africa are similar, but the Middle East is completely different. And, where I say there is less access in Africa, the Middle East has everything. So they are completely, familiar with luxury brands. They have incredibly high expectations. We have those beautiful flagship stores that I referenced earlier. So Dubai is very, very different to Africa. It's a very established market, and, consumers have a huge amount of knowledge and appreciation for luxury brands. But luxury brands really extend there to even interiors, interior brands. Hotels are vitrines almost for luxury brands in the Middle East. So it's a very, very different market to Africa.
So if you were profiling, let's say, or segmenting the luxury consumers, and we can talk about Africa or the Middle East or both. So if somebody was coming into segment for the first time, what would you recommend they should be looking out for? Is there a bit of a trap versus traditional segmentation that it might actually miss in these markets?
It's important, as I say, to get really close to your consumer. And I think something that we spoke about a lot, Amelia, is that we don't have the same robustness of data that one might have in a developed market. So it's really important to be close to your consumer and to then validate the segmentation models and approaches that, your agencies might be providing you. It's really important to also take into account age, and age is, very different here. So there's a lot of young consumers that are really interested in luxury brands and who have the wealth to access luxury brands. So we shouldn't segment only on, psychographics, but we should also consider strong demographics as well when considering how we segment in Africa.
And so you touched on something there that I really want to talk about, because I feel this is frustrating for a lot of brands, and it's not exclusive to Africa for one reason or another. Sometimes the insight infrastructure doesn't exist, in a particular market, in a particular category. And, global teams really rely on this. So when it doesn't exist, it can be a bit tricky. So I want to ask you, and we have spoken about this in the past before, how do you stay genuinely close to your consumer, when there aren't those traditional tools in place?
Yeah, I think there's many things. So the first is partnerships, making sure that you're not operating on your own. You need to connect with people. And I encourage my teams to all meet with journalists, with, publishers, with talents, with music artists. And I think that's critically important. We have to stay close to what's happening and close to trends. So making sure we're really feeling what's going on is key. We also leverage our sales teams, our trade marketing teams. They're all very close to the consumer, out and about, attending festivals, attending what's on happenings of the local market. And I think that's also a great way to connect. We have to take ownership for that as marketers, and everybody in the chain needs to be involved. So not just relying on getting insights, from the ground, but, I really encourage, everybody at every level to stay close. Recently I was in Nigeria and I made sure I went to an art exhibition that I heard was happening, and I had the privilege of listening to the artist talk and talk about what he wanted to convey and why he wants to convey it and what he wanted to evoke in his audience. And all of those moments are moments of learning, I believe, to really connect the dots and to understand what consumers are seeking, what's important to them, and what's happening on the ground. And I think in luxury in particular, you then need to join the dots. We can't be reliant only on data sources and big global trends decks. You have to really feel these things. And it's something I strongly believe in. And many of my bosses many years ago really instilled that in me, which is that, you have to have this curiosity. And it's something that I look for in talent as well. When they're interested in what's happening around them, I automatically know they're going to have the right sensibilities to truly be effective in the luxury industry.
Can you think of a time where something really surprised you, through that network, through these sort of, more on the ground techniques, something that you found out that really surprised you?
I suppose it didn't surprise me, but it really reinforced what I believed, but it gave me conviction to really land that with our global teams, which is the importance of recognizing local talent, recognizing talent in Africa. I think it's super important not to just parachute in and not to be reliant on the beautiful associations you have as a global luxury maison, but just assume that aspiration will land by sort of parachuting yourself into a new market. I think that was something that I remember thinking, this is critical. Like, we have to make sure that we're respecting the markets in which we find ourselves. And so I often talk about this hybrid that is required. You need the aspiration of a global brand. You need everything that, resonates with consumers from what has been built after hundreds of years. But then you need local fluency. You need to make sure that you have ways of connecting with consumers on the ground by understanding culture, craftsmanship, storytelling in a local way. So whether that be connecting with local talent, connecting with local music, you need to find ways of making sure that you're bridging the two. And I think I had a conversation that really cemented that for me, examples of where perhaps it might not have landed as intended. And, when you really unpack the why, often it's linked back to this.
I can think of one example that comes up for me is I remember when we were really, really promoting rosé champagne. You might remember some of these sort of efforts globally. And I remember being in front of consumers and discovering that men were drinking it more than we realized, and they didn't care that it was pink. Just as you say, those moments when you're actually on the ground, walking in consumers' shoes, sometimes the most fascinating insights come out. And yes, it's not quantitative, but, it does send you down the right path to explore with more formal research.
Absolutely. I mean, that makes me think of another example, which is that actually in Africa, consumers really enjoy our demi-sec offerings. And, for a long time, it wasn't always clear to some people why. And actually, it's not because of the packaging or because of, it's really the sweeter taste that consumers loved, So I think sometimes people, default into looking at the outer packaging or the storytelling but sometimes it's the intrinsics, as you say, that really resonate.
And that's when you're lucky if your brand is really sort of, embedded itself culturally, that they are ignoring the labels and what you're telling them. That's actually a great phenomenon, isn't it? So we've established Africa as one of the fastest growing wealth regions globally, as we mentioned. I feel like the question is no longer if luxury brands should engage, but it's more how and how fast. Mm-hmm. If we asked you, in your opinion and in your experience, if we were to be looking ahead, what shifts do you think luxury leaders should be really paying attention to right now in Africa and Middle East?
Gosh, it's a big question, but there's a couple of things that I think are really important. I think in the times we live in, and I'm sure you're experiencing, Amelia, everyone's behind a screen all the time, and it's getting tiring, I think, for people. And the sense of connection is a really, really powerful vehicle. And I think luxury brands have the opportunity to foster connection by bringing people together that might not ordinarily be in the same circle or in the same space, but actually they have a role to play in bringing people together when they're engaging with their brand and consumers. The other thing I think is that people are craving a sense of slowing down, and making things a little bit more tangible and real and with your hands. And so I think there's something quite powerful in that as well, is kind of bringing people into the luxury world where things are not mass produced in a factory, where they're crafted and where they're created. And that creates a sense of slowing down and appreciation and bringing us back to the things that really matter. And I think luxury has a really powerful role to play in that, because so much of what is created in the luxury industry is really created by artisans and craftspeople, people that are working with their hands, over time with patience, so all these values, I think, help us to slow down, help us to connect. And I think the other thing is to really look out for talent, local talent, making sure you're working with really brilliant people in the markets which you're operating is key, whether that's consumer facing, so talents that are then consumer facing, but also talents behind the scenes. Again, it talks to my point around parachuting in. If you're working with a global marketing agency, global ATL agency, that's great, but make sure you have a local production team, a local director, a local filmmaker, so that you're really bringing local nuances, local insights to the fore. And it comes through and it's felt, So I think those sort of things are critical. It's no longer, made in Paris for the world. It's, established in Paris many years ago, but actually nurtured and crafted, across the world. Hennessy, for me, is an example of that. It's an incredible brand that has lived in cultures all across the globe, and it's found its way to immerse itself with consumers differently in the US to Africa to Asia. But somehow it's because it's been truly connected to brilliant people, whether it's artists, music artists. And I truly believe that going forward, to be successful in Africa, we really need to look to do that.
And how do you think that's actually expressed in sort of luxury, I want to say, status? Have you noticed any shifts in the way people are displaying their luxury, or what kind of status they're looking to achieve with their luxury items, be it high net wealth or accessible luxury?
Again, I think luxury is being used obviously to signal personal growth, as people are rising and as people are achieving new trajectories, they're able to enjoy new forms of luxury and travel, hospitality, all those areas are growing significantly now because people are able to enjoy what maybe wasn't as available to them before. And I think dining in a communal space is also really interesting. And again, it's a way of forming connections, meeting people you wouldn't ordinarily have met. There's an interesting platform that has been launched in Africa where people are able to buy a ticket to a table and you join a table. You don't know who's going to be at the table, but you join the table because you're curious and you want to discover new people and a new story, and lots of brands partnering together to showcase what they have to tell at this dining experience. So I think this sense of community coming together is definitely very, very prevalent.
Okay, so if you had to place one big bet on Africa over the next few years, where would you focus on and what would you approach with caution?
The sheer scale of consumer in the African continent is, 1.5 billion people. If you just engage with the top 1%, it's incredibly significant. You could have 15 million people consuming one item of your portfolio. That is, it's meaningful. So I think, betting on the fact that there is scale is really important in terms of top line growth. That I believe is really something that can be meaningful to you in your business. But then also appreciating, and perhaps this is the risk component, that it won't necessarily be a straight line. It's very volatile. There's lots of ups and downs. But, long-term trajectory, lots of growth. I'm convinced about it, and I'm excited to really be a part of it and to see, more and more global iconic brands, reaching Africa. But it's complex and things change. The infrastructure is not as established. There's unfortunately geopolitical and economical challenges that sort of rear their heads during different moments of the year. And I can list many examples that I've personally had to deal with. But, I think that's the reality. It's not a straight line. It's not constant. You never know what might happen, and you have to be prepared to navigate that complexity. And I think that's why having a multi-market strategy is important, because where one market might be flourishing, another might have gone through a curveball that might, delay you by 3 or 4 months in your plan because of an election or whatever it might be. But, overall, there is a huge trajectory for growth.
Have you seen any impact in the Middle East on that point about sort of events happening in the region? Has it been felt yet by brands working in the region?
Oh goodness, absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, it's incredibly tough at the moment. The hospitality industry is seeing 10% occupancy in some of its restaurants at the moment, where normally they're 100% packed. It's incredibly challenging at the moment for that market. And I really hope it's it settles soon, because the impact is significant. It's reliant on tourism. Dubai has 3 million people, 3 million permanent residents, plus minus. So the tourism is what really fuels that market. And at the moment, it's very down. And obviously, it's a hub for many other markets, Maldives, etc. So from a tourism perspective, hospitality perspective, it's incredibly tough at the moment. So here's hoping that settles very soon.
If we kind of focus back on the African market, if there was, let's say, a brand is looking to build a case, to enter or expand in the African market, in your opinion, what would be the single strongest argument that they should probably lead with their business? And on the flip side, what would you say would be the biggest risk that they have to be ready to address?
I think it would be very similar to what I just shared, essentially. I think the biggest opportunity is the number of people. And when you really start to look market by market, you can really map your target audience, and you can just see the sheer scale of opportunity for you to reach new consumers. And I think that would definitely be a plus the fact that African consumers are traveling the globe. There's a huge amount of Nigerian diaspora around the world that you can influence in Africa that then travels the globe. So I think that's a very important plus. And the other plus is that African culture is really being celebrated. African music is selling out stadiums across the globe. So you want to be a part of that. You want to be a part of that as a brand, and making sure that your brand is resonating with that consumer, which I truly believe is going to shape culture beyond Africa.
I love it. There's so much happening. And I just spent the last 5 years living in France, and there is so much African culture. My children listen to African music, so it is absolutely spreading. I agree. And it's so festive and so happy. I can feel it. I could just feel it talking about it. Let's change gears. We've come to the end of our interview. Less of the sort of, professional, still professional, but less of the sort of more technical questions. Now we switch to mentor style questions. And the first one I want to ask you is, what's one piece of advice you'd give to marketers or brand leaders just starting out, especially when it comes to a career in luxury?
The first is absolutely intrinsically understand your brand DNA. Be passionate. I think if you're not passionate, it's felt, and luxury brands require passionate spokespeople, passionate ambassadors of the brands that they are entrusted to serve in the duration of the time that they are the custodian for the brand in their respective markets. So I truly believe making sure you understand your brand intrinsically, go to your maison, understand the intrinsics, the production, understand the history, go through the storytelling books. There are many usually, and make sure you really get close to what your brand is about. So I would say that's my number one. My number two is stay humble and curious, because I think often people think then, I've read everything, I know everything, but that's not, things evolve so quickly, as we spoke about earlier. So it's super important to make sure you continue to learn and continue to educate yourself around what's happening. Read, follow people that inspire you, and read what they're talking about, connect with them, reach out to them, and I think that's something that, one shouldn't be shy to do. That's so often that I take the time to reach out to someone new who is, doing something great, and learn from them, and vice versa. Offer my time to people who are just starting out and who are hungry to discover and learn. So I think that's really, really important. And then my third thing is don't do it alone. I think it's really important to realize that we're richer together. And this is something that I think can really differentiate a good marketer from a great marketer. The ones that think they should, define the brand plan on their own and work behind their desk on a PowerPoint, deciding the future trajectory of how they want to win market share in their respective market, are possibly going to lose a couple of things. The ones that tell me they've heard this and they've read that and they've spoken to this one and they've spoken to that one, and actually this person's eager to do this with them, that for me is much richer and much more exciting, because there's this sense of collaboration. And that extends further to extending with your global brand partners. I truly believe you have to build the trust of your global brands and your global maisons, as we call them, so the HQ, so that they can entrust you to build their brand in your respective market. So there's really this respect that is critical. They need to understand that you understand the local market, and you need to respect the global ambition they have for the brand that you are working on.
Would you say there's anything particular that you'd like to share with those wanting to work in luxury? That's what makes working in luxury different, from other categories.
The luxury industry is incredibly glamorous. It's a wonderful industry to be a part of. You get to experience amazing things, but it's also hard work, and it requires excellence, and it requires attention to detail, and it requires making sure that last little element is done perfectly, and being confident enough to push back on your partners and your agencies to say, it's not quite what I had in mind, and I'm actually looking for this, and really, challenging people around you to strive for that excellence is not always easy, especially if it's not familiar to them. So I think having rigor is key, and having a passion for details is critical if you want to be successful in the luxury industry. And being patient, I think, Amelia. I think sometimes I've observed people coming into the luxury industry, and they've maybe worked in other industries where things move quickly and fast, and they can get quite frustrated because they see the solution, they know what they need to do, but actually you need to have patience, because you have to work with multiple stakeholders, you have to win over people, you have to convince people, and you have to be patient because, quality takes time, and you need to be patient to strive for that excellence. I didn't say perfection, but I say excellence, because I think that's critical in being successful in luxury brand building.
You can tell how long someone's worked in an industry because I'm sitting here nodding, going, yes. No, we're not perfectionists. No, nothing negative. We just do things a certain way. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more on that one. I think it's a great way to sum it up. Okay, so we've come to the end, and I just want to ask you, based on what we've talked about today, is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you'd like to add?
I would just like to say thank you, Amelia. I think it's been such a wonderful opportunity to think about Africa like this. It's my day-to-day, and I'm incredibly passionate about it. But I think it's a great exercise in, really trying to articulate what you want to convey. And I think what you're doing to help educate people around luxury in different spaces and different markets is really fantastic. So thank you for doing what you're doing. I think it's a wonderful platform for people to learn. I'm personally going to make sure that many of my team listen to your episodes. So yeah, just a big thank you for the effort you're putting into driving the luxury industry forward.
Oh, Aimee, I'm speechless, and I'm not often speechless. Thank you. No, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you. And like I said, your region's been coming up quite a lot, and I know how intense it's been for you there. There's a lot of spotlight from headquarters on your region, and you've had some visits and, from headquarters. So you're doing an amazing job, and, just seeing even from some of the work you've done with, Veuve Clicquot, with the Bold Awards and some of the big campaigns, it's really exciting to see the region, just really open up to the rest of the world. So thank you for coming on and sharing that insight with us today. It's been a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much.
If you found today's conversation valuable, please share it with a friend or colleague in the luxury world who would benefit too. We'd also like to invite you to join our email community for exclusive tools, behind-the-scenes content, and early access to new resources. Just head to luxconsumeriq.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.